alternative therapeutics. Today, we'll be talking about how you make the most of your summer research internship. I know a lot of you are undergrads and possibly looking into doing research internships, whether you're doing one currently at your institution or you're looking forward to doing one in the upcoming summer. And so today we'll just discuss a couple of things that will help you to make the most of this opportunity. During this webinar, if you have any questions, you can type it into the chat box and I'll answer them as I see them. And also, there will be no mics on during the webinar. So again, if you have a question, just put it in the chat box and I'll answer them either while I'm talking or at the end, whatever's comfortable for you. So this is just an outline of a couple of things that we'll be going over today. Um, First thing will be a welcome to the world of research. For some of you, this may be your first time experiencing a summer internship in a research lab. And so what is it about? What are some things that you need to know about the lab? So we'll go over just the general concepts associated with the world of bench and biological research. Then we'll go over some general information, um, things that you need to know in the lab as far as dress attire, different people that you may interact with on a day-to-day basis. And last we will go over 10 ways to do the most. Now, the most is a term that we hear very frequently in society of people kind of just doing a lot. And so, how can I do the most when it comes to my lab research experience? And so, imaged here is a picture of a lady who is in a biological safety cabinet. And this cabinet is actually where people who do bench research tend to work. And just like myself, this lady works in either BSL-3 or BSL-4 laboratory, and we can tell what type of lab she works in by the level of PPE that she has on. So she has on a protective face mask. She's fully covered in her lab coat, and she has gloves, so there's no skin exposed. Also, she has on a face mask. Um, and so I actually do this level of research, and when I'm ready to go into the lab, I'm fully dressed and covered with no skin exposed, just because I work with extremely pathogenic viruses and infections such as Ebola and B virus. So, what is a summer research internship? When we start thinking of preparing ourselves for the next step, so basically, after I finish, when I'm getting ready to apply to graduate school, how do I make myself the most competitive? And one way that you do this is by completing a summer internship. A lot of times when you apply to graduate school, they want to look at your application and say, has this person had any previous exposure to bench research prior to coming to grad school? And one way to get that exposure and experience is by doing a summer research internship. During the summer, it'll be very exciting. You're going to learn a lot of new techniques. You'll be exposed to novel topics, very high profile journal publications. You're going to learn how to think critically and analytically. So basically, when faced with a question or a problem, you have the opportunity to look objectively at this situation and come up with a result. You're going to learn the art of designing an experiment, how to go from a question to actually developing results. And lastly, you're going to be able to learn how to analyze your data. So when you design an experiment and you complete an experiment, what you're going to get are results. And how is it that we read these results and utilize them to produce data that can be presented in possibly a poster presentation that you may be doing later in the year, either a journal publication or either just a small report. How is it that we utilize this data and present it in the future? So completing a summer internship, it's an amazing opportunity to be a contributor to the intellectual property of a research team. A lot of our labs, research labs that students go into, they're very high profile labs. They're doing very interesting studies that are helping students to gain exposure to much more complex ideas than those that you go over in class. And when we say the intellectual property of a lab, we're talking about actually being a contributor to new knowledge. So as a student, right now, you're a consumer of knowledge. So your teacher gives you reading assignments, or you read your textbooks, or you're reading other information that someone has said, yes, this is the current knowledge in the field. However, the beauty of research is we're producing new knowledge. So there are things that no one has ever there are things that no one has ever studied yet, and what you're doing is you're presenting answers to these unknown questions. So you're going from the side of being a consumer of knowledge as a student to being an actual producer of knowledge as an investigator. And so what I have imaged here is a what I have imaged here is a graph of groundbreaking research. And so this is a term that people use very oftenly when they want to describe their research. It's groundbreaking, it's novel, it's new, it's never been done before. So sometimes what your graph may look like is this. My actual data may be, down here, while my question may actually serve as, a tangential line. However, to get groundbreaking, I might have to break through this curve. And so just be patient with yourself as you go through, just be patient with yourself as you go through the research process. Um, Again, this is not just about producing data, just to let you know, this is also about having a wonderful new experience. And some of you may find out research is going to be a good fit for you, and others of you may find out that it's not. But I would encourage you just to have an open mind about um, your summer internship. Go with an open mind, go ready to learn, go excited, go with new ideas. And this will help you kind of to be unbiased when it comes to the lab and also just understanding what's a good fit for you. And I just want to take a quick break to make sure everyone is hearing me okay. I don't know if there are any volume issues out there, but if you hear me okay, one person can just type back yes. Okay, great. So Image Tear, I thought it was a very cute cartoon, basically showing some people in the lab, and we see that they're some people are being more diligent, while some people are actually kind of using it as a little study break. And the truth is, when you get to the lab, it's really going to be your responsibility to make the most of it. Um, a lot of people, when they work in the lab, it's very independent. And so as coming in as an intern, you kind of have to make sure that you are literally making the most of this opportunity. Every lab has specific rules and customs that should be followed to ensure the homeostatic balance of the lab. And coming in as an intern, um, you should try to follow these customs and rules as closely as possible, compromising as long as you are not compromising your any personal beliefs when it comes to working in the lab. So what do I expect? I'm going into this new lab. What is there to expect? There are a lot of assays there I'm going to have to do. There are a lot of machines. I may not know how to use it. So how do I make sure that once I get into this lab, I am functioning properly? Um, so the first thing that happens when you get into a lab is you're going to be given your own project. So your your PI or your research supervisor or mentor, they're going to sit down and they're going to tell you, hey, I want you to study this particular subject. When I first did my first summer research internship in California, My project was looking at the usage of different fatty acids on the degeneration of neuronal cells. Mind you, I had never yet taken a neurobiology course, so I had no true understanding of what neuronal cells actually do in regards to fatty acids or even just their regular function. And so the first thing I had to do as an intern was to gain a good understanding of the field. And how do we gain a good understanding of what is out there in the field? We must do um, reading and read background literature, either review articles or research articles. It is only through reading and going to look up probably on PubMed or different search engines just like JSTOR that you actually get a good understanding of what is out there, what is the current knowledge on the field that you're going to be researching for the summer. And as you do this research, you'll understand one, how to better approach your project, and two, when you see data either from other members of the lab or from your PI, you won't be so far behind. And so I would encourage you before you even go into the lab, if you know the lab that you're going to be going to, and if your current PI already has a project in mind for you, send them an email and ask them, hey, is there any literature that I can do some reading up on before I come into the lab, just so you're up to date on what you're doing and what is out there in the field. So how do we actually do a search of the literature? How do I do a background search to make sure that I'm looking at all the right information? And so this is a flowchart that I found online, and I thought it was very helpful in just listing steps on doing a literature search. So first thing, scoping your search topic. So in my case, my search topic was the usage of fatty acids on neuronal cells. And so the first thing I want to know is what are the different types of fatty acids out there? And so you would go to either PubMed, you would go to JSTOR. Just I want to put in a note. Wikipedia is not the most um, effective search engine. So please, when you go into these labs, do not utilize Wikipedia. PubMed is much better, much better, and more highly recommended. So, you go to PubMed.com, you're going to put in your topic, and then you're going to come up with a list of thousands of journals. One thing you can do is ask your mentor, what are the best journals that are read in our field? And you can look in those journals to see what they are talking about when it comes to your subject. Next thing is choosing your search terms. So there are different keywords that you can put in to PubMed or JSTOR, and it will specifically pick up articles that will kind of help you understand the research and the literature more. So making sure you have the right search terms when you're when you're actually typing in your subject into a search engine such as PubMed. Next thing is compiling your search strategy and running your own search. You may have a great mentor and a great advisor that's going to sit there and help you find articles, or they may even find articles for you. But for those of you that may not have that accessibility, you have to be familiar with running the search engine yourself. And luckily, places like PubMed actually have little tutorials at the bottom that shows you how to use it to either look up new papers, or if you have to run a DNA search and look up a sequence, there are tutorials there that are accessible for you in order to do it. Number 5 is very important because it's the part where you actually click the link and find a full text. Now, some texts are free and some texts are not. So in order to make sure that you have access to those texts, you can actually go into a box and say, I specifically want to look at um, articles that I have free access to, meaning I don't have to pay any money in order to pull up the full article. And the next thing is managing your information. One thing that I did when I started doing research is compiling an Excel spreadsheet and putting the references or the articles that I thought that were important to my research in the Excel spreadsheet and kind of keeping up with them that way. Another option is also building an EndNote library. And so putting your references in EndNote will make them more accessible for you. Let's say if you want to go back and compare your findings to what someone else found in your field. It's just a good way to keep organized. The more organized you are in the lab, the better it will be for you in the future when it comes to writing or putting together your poster, or even at the end, there are different symposiums that some schools actually put together. And so just knowing that you have your references already together and in order, it's definitely helpful. So while working on this project, some things that you'll have to do is to formulate a hypothesis. So basically, in my case, when I was looking at the usage of fatty acids on epithelial cells, my hypothesis was that when I used saturated fatty acids versus unsaturated fatty acids, they would have different effects on the ability of these cells to grow and proliferate. So as you do these experiments, you always want to start off with making a hypothesis. What is it that I hope to understand from this experiment? What is it? How will this answer help me go to my next step of my experiment? So always move with a hypothesis. Um, Make sure either your mentor or again, either a postdoc or a grad student can help you keep focused on these hypotheses so you know whether or not they're accurate or whether or not you may need to formulate another one. Another thing that you'll do this summer is you're going to learn new research techniques. Some of you will be in cell culture labs where you're going to be learning how to split cells and how to make sure you're using the most sterile techniques to prevent contamination. Some of you are going to be looking specifically at the DNA concentration in different samples. Some of you are going to be looking at the expression of different receptors by using flow cytometry. Some may be learning how to do microscopy work or even Western blotting. And so there are a lot of techniques that are going to be available to you in this summer. And so I just encourage you again not to be overwhelmed when you get to the lab and you see all these machines that you probably have never seen, but just be open minded and ready to learn how to use them and how they'll help you again translate data to the masses. The next thing you're going to have to do is keeping a lab notebook. This is a very important step. Your lab notebook is basically your notes for the day. How is it that I designed my experiment? And the beauty of a lab notebook is that it allows someone to come back maybe 15 years later, look at your note, and a skilled professional to come back 15 years later, look at your notes and try to recapitulate the data that you've done. And so keeping a lab notebook is highly important while working on this project. The next thing, you're going to work closely with a supervisor that's going to guide you in designing how to make your experiments and how to execute them. And this relationship that you build with your supervisor can really either break or make your research experience. And so, again, I encourage you when it comes to, joining this lab, working with your supervisor, make sure you have an open line of communication. I mean, don't be afraid to ask questions. That is what you are there to do. You are there to learn, and they know that you're there to learn, and they know that you do not know everything when it comes to the lab. So make sure that you are asking questions. If someone says something and you don't quite understand it, ask, what do you mean by that? If a term is used and you've never heard that term before, don't be afraid to say, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with this term. Can you please explain what this is? Or if they're describing data and you don't understand it, say, I don't understand. It's better to voice what you are confused about than to go home, at the end of the day with the confusion. Um, the next thing is you're going to have to attend lab meetings, symposiums, and possibly classroom lectures. At different institutions during the summer, there are going to be different speakers that come from other schools that are going to present their data. And as a summer intern, it is actually very beneficial just to be exposed to other forms of research outside of that what you're doing in the lab. At medical campuses, sometimes they conduct classroom lectures where someone may be coming in to describe how to, make a Western blot more efficient, or they may talk about how to use new probes to identify receptors on cells. And so, again, attending things like class lectures, again, will be very important. And also lab meetings. These are going to be your weekly meetings with different personnel within the lab, and it gives everyone a chance to talk about, their data, if they're having any problems, troubleshooting experiments, and things like that. The next thing you're going to do, which I think is the most exciting, is you're going to produce scientific results within a 12-week period. And so these results, again, will be new. They have never been seen before. Your PI is not going to give you a project that they know the data for. And so what you are, you're on the forefront of knowledge by making or producing new data that allows us to understand the answer to a question that was never answered before. And lastly, you're going to get a good experience and exposure. And this experience is going to be very valuable to you as you go on through your career, educational career, trying to decide what path is for you. So whether you'll go into a path of research, whether you're going to go into a path of engineering, whether you're going to go into a path of medicine, this exposure in this summer through this internship will help you kind of to understand a feel of whether research will be or won't be for you. So I've done my literature search, but I don't understand the details of my project. So like I said before, you're going to go into the summer research and you're going to sit down with your PI or supervisor and they're going to tell you that I want you to study this protein. I want to determine if it is important in our field or if it's not. And what the first thing you're going to do is you're going to have to do a literature search. But what happens when you do this literature search and you still don't understand the details of your project? Is it just me? Am I the only person that does a literature search, and I'm still confused? And to you, I want to say keep calm because you actually are not alone. So this gap in knowledge is actually very frequently experienced by summer interns. And the reason being is because sometimes your research project may be on a specific subject area that either you haven't had access to learn about through your courses, or it's so detailed that the knowledge that you get from your science courses doesn't quite allow you to understand it at the level that of the research that you're doing. And unlike your class assignments, in class you're given an assignment and the answers are normally already predetermined. So there is an answer book that says this is the answer to that question. However, in research, we're asking questions that haven't been answered. And so basically you're gonna again have to be patient with yourself and know that you are the true investigator at this point and you really have the answers to the question. And so for those areas where you're researching and you don't understand, make sure that you go to a pair that's in the lab, possibly again a grad student or undergrad student, a technician or a lab assistant, and say, hey, this is my project, but I'm not quite sure how I do the research, or I'm not quite sure what these proteins actually do. Is there any reading information that you can um, lead me to that can help me get a better understanding of what it is that I have, what it is that I need to know in order to answer this question? And 9 times out of 10, there's going to be someone in that lab that is going to be willing to help you. So make sure, again, when you get to a point and you're stuck in your project and you don't really understand what it is that your PI wants from you, go to a student. If you feel too intimidated to ask your actual boss, go to either a grad student or undergrad or a lab tech and ask them for help. And I'm positive that they will help you. Okay, so you can, what are some things that you can expect during your first week once you get to this new lab? The first thing that's going to happen is you're going to get a bench area to work or share. Some labs are going to be very big and you're going to have an entire work area to yourself. Some labs are going to be either more full or smaller, and so you'll have to share a bench either with your PI or with your current supervisor or with another lab mate. And so just know that you will have an area to do your work and to do your research. The second thing you're going to expect is, again, you're going to sit down with your PI to discuss, your summer project. So your PI probably will be thinking of uh, a part of his research that he can give you to investigate. And he's going to sit down with you and you're going to talk about what it is that you're going to try to complete in the summer. Again, this is a prime opportunity. They will use terms that, again, you have never heard. They may use terms, different assays that you've never heard of. So what you can do is either one, write it down and look it up when you go home, or ask, I'm sorry, I've never heard of this assay before, or you're talking about this protein, I'm not really familiar with it. Can you bring me up to speed about why is it important to our research? The next thing you're going to get is a campus ID and key card access to the building or the lab that you're going to be working in. Make sure that you take very precious care of this card and your access to the building, as if you lose it, you probably will not be able to go into lab. The next thing, you're going to be assigned an area to store your reagents for your experiments. Make sure when you are in the lab, you're labeling everything so that you're not mixing up, your reagents with someone else's reagents, because that can get very confusing. So just try to be as disciplined in placing your things in your designed area. So what is it that I do during my first week? The first thing you're going to do is introduce yourself to everyone in the lab. Hey, my name is Jessica. I'm a new summer intern. What is it that you do? What's your project about? And they will definitely sit and tell you about their project, because one thing that scientists do enjoy doing is talking about the work that they do. Familiarize yourself with how the lab is run. So, what time do people come in? Um, what are the times that people may go to lunch? What time do people leave? How does this lab run? The next thing I would encourage you to do is to take notes of everything. When I first started working in my lab, I would go to the back of my lab notebook, and if I had any question of where's this reagent, I would actually put where to find things in the back of my lab notebook. So instead of continuing to go to people to ask them, I would remember, oh yeah, they told me that I can find cell media in the fridge on the second shelf, or I can find Western blot reagents in the -80 in the second room. There are going to be a lot of refrigerators, a lot of benches. So by, making note of where things are, it kind of helps you to kind of gain a little bit of independence versus asking someone all the time, every single time, for the same reagent that you're going to use multiple times in your experiments. The last thing to do is, when you are confused about your experiment, please ask questions. And this is particular for when you're starting a new experiment and you haven't done anything. Do not assume what you're supposed to do. Don't just say, oh, I can probably, maybe if I mix these reagents together, it doesn't matter. If you are in doubt, ask a question, especially when it comes to mixing reagents or starting experiments in your lab. So just a couple of general lab information. So this is a list of different lab personnel that will be in the lab. So your principal investigator, this is going to be the boss of the lab. This is the main person that actually runs the lab. He's the one that is going to be thinking about, he's the one that is actually funding all of your research. Um, and he's writing on grants. You may see him in the lab, you may not. But the person that you actually work for is known as your principal investigator. The postdoc, this is going to be a scientist in the lab that has already received their PhD, and they work more independently, or either in collaborations with projects. And so their role in the lab is kind of to allow them to establish more research knowledge. And so this is actually a very vital person that you can go to if your lab has postdocs. Utilize the postdocs if you have any questions. Your lab technician is another worker in the lab, and they kind of do more assays and experiments as well. And again, another person that is well versed in the knowledge of how the lab works. A lot of times, if you need help in troubleshooting, or if you're running an assay and you're not sure, if you're running an experiment and you may run out of reagents, going to your lab tech, or if an incubator is broken, the lab tech is the person that you would go to and say, hey, this isn't working properly. Can you tell me how? Can you put in a request to either get it fixed, or, hey, I'm not sure if these two chemicals can be mixed together. Can I mix them together? Your lab tech is very good in helping you get through those aspects of your project. A grad student working in the lab is either going to be a master's student or a PhD student working on their thesis work. And again, grad students are probably going to be more accessible and easier to talk to because they're more like your peers. as far as age-wise, and just knowledge base. They're just a lot more easier to talk to. And so you may find that running questions to the grad student will be helpful as far as going through this process. Also, you might be working closely with a graduate student, and they'll be the person that's overseeing your project and the person that's helping you to design your experiment. So make sure you're building a good you're having good interaction, a good relationship with them so that you can indeed go to them and say, hey, I'm stuck in this project. What do I do? A rotation student, this may be someone like yourself that's just there, that's located on the college campus, that's coming in just to explore what the lab environment is. Undergraduate students, in a lot of institutions at the graduate level and undergrad level, undergrad students are actually play a vital role in doing the research. So they're actually there either year round or during the summers all the time to help build up, gain lab experience so that they can make their next step in their career. And the summer student, which would be yourself, will be there again just to gain exposure to the lab, figure out if lab research is a good fit for them. Some labs are fortunate to have laboratory supervisors, and this is the person that kind of handles a lot of the paperwork and making sure that you're um, getting all your coverage as far as making sure you take the proper safety mechanisms and certifications, making sure that you're up to date with your OSHA. This is the person that kind of will make sure all those papers are together for you so you don't get in trouble. And your lab safety officer is there to make sure that you are not mixing any chemicals that should not be mixed together, making sure that you're not coming to lab in flip flops and shorts, um, that you're putting your safety first as it comes to your research. So when it comes to a lab, as I said before, that there are different routines that every lab follows, and it's of a great benefit to you to try to follow again these labs as closely as possible, so it keeps the environment chaos free. A lot of times people like things to be in a specific order, and so just make sure when you're in the lab that you're helping to keep the lab together. The work hours of your lab will vary from lab to lab. And one of the unfortunate parts of research is that, unlike most people that have a regular 9 to 5 workday, we do not. So there may be times where you have to stay a little later or maybe come in a little later to do an experiment. But when it comes to doing things like that, I would strongly encourage you to talk to either your PI or the student that you may be working with to see what times you should be coming into lab and what times you should leave. Because again, our hours can be very unpredictable. And so just making sure that you're planning your day out accordingly, that'll be a great benefit to you. The next thing is your dress code. What do I wear to lab? One advantage of working in the lab is you actually have the freedom to come to lab in more casual clothing in comparison to the more formal apparel of individuals that work either in hospitals and companies. However, when it comes to dressing for a lab, you want to make sure that you are wearing safe clothes. So basically your protective wear, your goggles, if you're in a lab where goggles are worn, your gloves, your lab coat, and closed-toe shoes. You don't want to wear anything to lab that you're going to mind either spilling bleach on or phenol on and messes up. You want to, make sure you're comfortable, but also make sure that you are protected in the clothes that you wear. Laboratory meetings is something that you're going to have to attend on a weekly basis. And like I stated before, these laboratory meetings discuss either the current research of the lab workers, the current research in the field, so someone may be presenting a journal article, or just general laboratory business. But I would encourage you to make sure that you try to attend all of your lab meetings this summer. I thought this cartoon was actually very funny, and I got it from the PhDcomics.com, and it kind of talks about what the lab experience a lab meeting experience is, and it's actually pretty accurate. There's the person that waited until the last minute to put his presentation together. There's people that are going to be looking at your data to see, what questions can I ask. There's going to be the student that is looking and really doesn't understand anything that's going on, but is maybe too afraid to ask a question. So, again, when you get into these lab meetings, just even if you don't understand what's going on, still try to attend, and even just write down questions. If you're that interested in what's presenting, write down questions. Maybe go up to the person after lab and say, hey, you said, you talked about this protein or you talked about this cell factor, and I really didn't understand what it was about. Can you explain it to me? And 9 times out of 10, they will sit and explain it to you. So last part, making it count. So basically, when I get to the lab, what are some things that I think are important to help making a student successful? So the first thing you want to do is to create a checklist of what you hope to gain from your research experience. So maybe you want to develop some skills at the bench. Maybe you want to develop skills as a scientific writer. Make sure you make a checklist of these things so that you won't feel that your summer is just a waste and you're just in the lab. Make sure you actually have goals that you want to accomplish. Um, Also, make a note of people that you want to meet. Let's say if you're at maybe an institution like Johns Hopkins or Yale, or Harvard or University of Chicago or Emory, there are different people that are on campus that are accessible for you to meet in the summer. Maybe you're really interested in the work that they're doing, and you may not have been able to do a research rotation with them, but you can ask, hey, can I sit down and grab either lunch with you or a cup of coffee to see, tell me about what you're doing and how you got there. Also, there may be departments on campus that you want to visit. You may be at a medical college and maybe you want to watch a surgery. You've never seen a surgery before, or you want to shadow a physician. Um, Try to make the most of this opportunity. When I was in California, even though I was doing research, I got an opportunity to also shadow some physicians while I was on campus. And so, don't be afraid to reach out to people and send them emails and say, hey, I think what you're doing is important. Would you mind if I come and visit your department after I leave the lab today? And they'll either tell you yes or no. Next thing, get a clear understanding of what is expected of you in the lab. Um, Try to understand what your PI wants you to know. Are there any goals that he would like you to accomplish on his side from your experiments? Is there any timelines that you should be working toward to complete this task? Are there any different assays or experiments that you should really be focusing on that are important for the field that you need to know? And most importantly, knowing your arrival time. What time do they want you to come in, so that you guys can work together? The next part, and I don't think I can stress this enough, is reading scientific literature. Reading has great benefits, especially when you're reading on the science level. And I encourage all students, especially when you're going into a new field, try to read at least 2 scientific papers per week. And also not just reading those papers, but going up to people and say, hey, I got this paper. I thought it was really interesting. Can you make time to sit down and talk to me about some of the data in it or some of the assays that they did? And most likely the people that work in your lab will be happy to sit down and help you get a better understanding, because everyone knows that you are there to learn. And it's really in the best interest of yourself and the lab that everyone is promoting your interest in the field. The next thing is to be intentional about your experiments. Basically, don't just go to the lab and sit down and start an experiment and not know what you're doing or know where the reagents are. Make sure that you're prepared for your experiment. Review the protocols. What are all the steps that I need to do? Make sure that you have all your reagents available. Maybe someone might have used, the last of something and you're preparing to use it. If you set up all of your experiments the day before, you actually have a better chance of making sure that you are together. And if there is a reagent that you don't have, you can place an order or even find, someone in another lab that may have it. Next thing, make sure you have a clear mind. If you're feeling down that day, or if you have a lot on your mind and you're trying to do this experiment that has 20 steps, there's a chance that you might miss a step. So before you even start an experiment, make sure you have a clear mind before you go into the lab and sit at the bench and start. Next thing is keep a good lab notebook with all your steps. Make sure you are literally listing out all the steps you're doing, because again, your lab notebook is kind of your fingerprint, and it allows someone else to go back, maybe a new student to pick up from the project, and they can see where you left off and expand on the data that you have. And next thing, remain objective. Have an unbiased view of your results. Yes, we would love to all have perfect data, but the truth is that doesn't always happen. And so if you're at the bench, just try to have a clear mind of maybe this result will be positive, or maybe it will be negative. But at the end of the result, at the end of the experiment, it is still a result, and it has helped us to answer a question again that we never knew the answer to. Next thing, number 5 is be willing to learn from other lab personnel outside of your summer mentor. So a lot of your mentors and PIs may be busy and may not have the opportunity to really sit down with you every day. And this is where you can actually be proactive and go talk to someone else who works in the lab that may have the answers for you, or even you can watch them do experiments. No one ever says, no, don't watch me, please don't come and stand over my shoulder. They're actually very open to watching and will actually allow you to, they may even explain to you what they're doing and why they're doing it. So just be open and utilize these people around you to help you to learn new things this summer. The worst thing to do is just to sit down at your bench, kind of twiddling your thumbs, not knowing what to do. So if you're bored, you find yourself bored, or you have downtime, maybe you have a 2 hour incubation period, instead of just sitting there, maybe you can, learn a new lab technique in the meantime. Next thing that is very important is networking. Um, Again, you're going to be on a campus or in an institution where there are hundreds of labs. And don't be afraid to introduce yourself to someone. Say, hey, my name is Jessica. I'm a summer intern in the lab, and I've seen your posters, or I've seen your research, and I just think what you're doing is really awesome. Also, utilize your access to campus to your advantage. A lot of times there'll be either, again, different seminars that are going on. There will be different scientists that are coming to visit, and it's an opportunity for you to learn. Research is a learning experience. You have just entered the world of learning, and so be open to learning about new things that are happening out there in the field. The next thing is also try to get in touch with different alumni from your school that may be located in the area or the city that you're working. Try to connect with people and just build a network. You never know when you're going to meet these people again, but if you have that contact, try to network as much as possible, because you never know if you'll either need them in the future, or they may know information to help you make your next step. Um, Also, looking up other professionals in the area. There may be another topic that you're interested in, and maybe after work, you can, set up a meeting with them, or maybe on the weekend, see if you can talk to them and just figure out how is it that they got to where they got. What are the steps that they, took, and what's some advice that they can give you. Actually, this past week, I actually met a mentor someone that I met when I was in college, that really helped me make decisions for my career. And it was just awesome just to say, hey, thank you so much for your advice to me, when I was trying to decide the career path that I had. So, always try to make sure when you present yourself that you're building, a good relation with people. Never leave a bad taste. Um, never try to leave a bad taste of yourself or of someone in your, when you meet them. Always try to make it a positive experience. Next thing is to participate in extracurricular activities. Be social. Do not just go to lab and go home. You have to remain balanced during this summer. It is the summer. And while you are learning, um, you do want to also be social. You want to have fun this summer. And so if there are students that are going out or having a trip, try to find out what is happening in your area so that you're making the most of it. Um, your social life is equally as important as what you're doing at the bench. So make sure, again, you're just not just going to work and producing data or staying super late, but you're also having a good time in the city. Next thing, be a good representative of your college or university. You are a brand. And right now you're an ambassador. And maybe this PI that you're working with has never had a student from your school. And so what you are is your representation of what it is that the type of quality of student your school, produces. And so you always want to put your best foot forward. You do not want to go into the lab and give them a bad impression of, especially if they've never heard of your school before, you don't want to give them a bad impression of your school. So make sure you represent yourself well, carry yourself professionally because it speaks volume. It speaks a lot of volume. Nine, this is very important. Ask your PI if they'll be willing to write a letter of recommendation for you, further in the future. You want to see if this, professor is going to be willing when you're either applying for a master's program or grad school, that you can go back to them and say, hey, I'm looking into applying for grad school. Can you write a letter of recommendation? And maybe they'll say yes. Well, hopefully they would say yes. You want to, again, leave a good impression on them so that they're willing to help you or write a letter of support in your application. And the last thing, most importantly, is having an attitude of gratitude. You always want to leave and say thank you. This is a huge opportunity for you. And again, you're going to be living in this institution for the next 3 months. You're going to be working there for the next 3 months. So you always want to, just express your gratitude when it comes to the end of your research opportunity. Maybe you want to leave them a thank you, card, for if you're working with a grad student, maybe a $5 gift card to Starbucks. But always remember, to say thank you, when it comes to working there in the lab. Just so it leaves a good taste for, it leaves a good impression not only on the PI, but it also just shows that you were appreciative as, for the experience. So this is actually, I've come to actually the end of, my talk, and I was just wondering if anyone had any questions, um, that you have. I will answer them. And I actually see one question already. So if you have summer classes, would it be possible to schedule research time around your classes? The answer is yes. And so a lot of times you can look up a PI that you're interested in doing the research with and send them an email and say, hey, I have classes at this time. And they'll work with your schedule. And they will actually, yeah, they'll work with your schedule. They'll tell you to come in either, at this time. Maybe if the experiment takes 5 hours, they'll try to tell you when you have an incubation time, and you can work around that. So a lot of professors are very understanding when it comes to students that have summer classes. They're not going to say, no, you can't work in my lab just because you're doing summer research. Are there any other questions? What are the websites we can research from? Oh, so are you speaking of doing a literature search? If you're talking about the areas where you're when doing okay, so when doing a literature search, some of the places that you can go, you can look at PubMed, you can look at JSTOR. A lot of schools have, and I'll type them in the box for you. PubMed, JSTOR. There also your at your school's library. There's going to be a, research box where you can actually look into the different journals that they have. And so just make sure when you're looking up these articles, some of them they're going to ask for you to pay. So you can actually put in, specifically for you to have access only to, the free to free articles versus ones that you have to pay money for. Does everything I say also apply to industry? Um, so I've only done bench research, but if you're doing an internship in research, in industry, a lot of things possibly do apply. So when it comes to, knowing the time that you come, yes, when it comes to asking about questions and making sure you're up to date in general, you want to be as informed as possible. And so, as far as just asking questions, making sure if you're on the research side of industry, making sure you have an up to date lab manual, those are very, very important. And so you want to make sure that as far as just interning in general, networking is very important. So a lot of the things do apply. So you may not be as specific when it comes to the project. So in industry, you're more so given a project to work on, and you're given more. Look, you're on a smaller time scale. But as far as the way that you conduct yourself, I would say it does generally apply. Yes, and also last week's webinar, which I actually did watch, was about getting ready for a career in industry. So I would actually encourage you to watch that as well because I thought it was extremely informative. Well, I guess there are no more questions. And so I just want to thank you guys. Oh, I think there's another question coming. So I believe the PowerPoint will actually be accessible online, possibly next week. And so if you go to the website, I believe that you'll be able to um, watch the webinar again.